Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm sorry we're a couple of minutes late. We'll start in a little bit. We have around 85 people registered. We have around 40 people right now. And we appreciate you being here with us tonight. In the meantime, while we wait for more people to join, I just want to give you a quick reminder about how to use Zoom. I just want to remind everybody, please remain muted. You'll have a chance where you'll be able to speak, you'll be able to ask questions. And the system that we're using right now is the raise hand option. If you're using a desktop, you'll see this option at the bottom of your screen. This might be a little bit different depending if you're using a cell phone or a tablet, but by pressing the raise hand option, the raise hand button when you have a question, will call your name and then you'll have 2 minutes to unmute yourself and ask your question. In the meantime, you can use the chat. Please use that to say hello, let us know where you're from, if you are from the Squirrel Hill area, or if you're just like a neighbor that are curious, please say hi, let us know where you're from. And if you also have questions and you don't feel like you want to talk, you can always use the chat option. And again, please remain muted at all times unless we call your name. Also, I just wanted to let you know that we have a closed caption option available. So that will be also at the bottom of your screen. 2 more reminders. One is that this meeting is being recorded. And if for some reason you have family or friends, neighbors that couldn't be here tonight, and they're also interested about this project, they will be able to watch this video, the recording of this presentation. They will also be able to look at the slides at our website. We'll be sharing that on the chat really soon. And just letting everybody know that we have Jim, who's going to be our interpreter for the night. So if you require an interpreter, you can always go to Jim's window, click on the 3 little buttons and hit the option pin. So that way he's going to be the first picture on your screen. But yeah, I see we have more people joining. So thank you so much for that. Just again, whoever just joined, just really quick reminder, please remain muted. If you have a question that you actually want to talk, please use the raise hand option. If you don't want to talk, you can always use the chat. Again, let us know where you're from. Say hi so your neighbors know that you're here. If you need the chat, if you need to ask questions, you can use the chat or raise your hand. We have closed captions available. And just a reminder, this meeting is going to be recorded. So I feel like we can actually go ahead and start. I'm going to pass it to, I guess, Kim Lucas.
Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you everyone who has joined us tonight. As Ricardo said, we're expecting almost 100 people who have registered, and we know that it takes energy and it takes time to come out and to participate in public engagement like this. And so we really appreciate you taking that time and spending that energy to talk about these projects tonight. My name is Kim Lucas, and I am with the City of Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, where I serve as the Assistant Director for Planning, Policy, and Permitting. I'm going to let my co-host introduce themselves, so I'll kick it off to Karina Ricks, our Director.
Great, thank you. I'm Karina Ricks. Nice to meet you all. Apologize periodically because I am a delayed unmuter trying to find it on the screen. So happy to be here and happy to see all of you.
Thanks, Karina. Paige, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I think I've met a lot of you. It's good. For anyone wasn't here the last ones, my name is Paige Anderson. I'm a project engineer in the traffic division of DOMI. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Paige. Anna?
Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Tang. I am the community organizer with Bike Pittsburgh.
Thanks, Anna. All right, and so it looks like we have a little over 50 people that are participating, so we'll go ahead and kick this off. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So tonight we're going to review some options for an east-west connection to improve bicycling in the Squirrel Hill community. We will first review Pittsburgh's mobility goals and the Move Forward PGH program that the project tonight falls within. We'll talk a little bit about a complete street network proposal for Squirrel Hill and opportunities and concerns, and engage in a discussion about what some of the challenges or opportunities are with some of the different project types that could be built. And finally, we're going to round it out with an alternatives discussion so that we can get an idea from today's meeting about what some of the best projects are that we're talking about that we can take back for further analysis. Next slide. So Pittsburgh's mobility goals. Next slide. So our number one goal at the City of Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure is safety. We believe that nobody, no matter what mode of transportation they're using, should be killed or seriously injured while using our roadways. And so safety is our number one factor when we're considering new projects and changes to the public space. Our second goal has to do with accessibility. We believe that all residents should have access to fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel time of their home, and that access should not require the use of a private automobile. We believe that even if you're using public transportation, that we want you to be able to get from your home to fresh foods within 20 minutes. Our third goal has to do with short distance trips. We want to make sure that if an individual or a family wants to walk or bike or roll from wherever they are to their destination, that it's easy and enjoyable for them to do so. That means that there's a safe way for them to do it and that the environment is conducive to it. Our fourth goal has to do with affordability. We hope that no household will spend more than 45% of their income, regardless of what that income is, on the combination of housing and mobility, including energy costs. At the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, we can't control housing costs, and we know that in many places those costs are rising. What we can do, though, is increase and improve access to affordable modes of transportation like walking, biking, and public transit. And finally, our fifth goal, and one that I know many of you on the call tonight share, has to do with having our streets reflect the pride of the city of Pittsburgh. There's rich history in the city of Pittsburgh, and we want to make sure that our streets, we care about our streets and the way they look and the way they function just as much as every one of you. Next slide, please. Here are a few facts that we also are considering when we're talking about new connections and changing how our roadways operate today. Nearly a quarter of Pittsburgh residents and households do not have access to a private automobile. So that means they're getting around through shared transportation options, biking and walking, and sometimes relying on rides from friends and family. A third of our residents already bike, walk, and take public transit to work. And we know that the more people that are taking modes like public transit or biking and walking to get to their destinations, fewer cars on the road means less congestion for everyone else, better air quality, and easier parking for those who are using their automobile to travel. In Pittsburgh, individuals of color are overrepresented in pedestrian and bicycle crashes. As you can see here, as studied in our Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, we found that Pittsburghers of color are subject to crashes, injuries, and fatalities by a factor of 2 to 1, so twice as likely. And we know that our streets need to be safe for everybody, regardless of how they're traveling, what they look like, or where they live. A quarter of motor vehicle trips within the city of Pittsburgh currently are less than 1 mile. So that tracks directly into our goal about making short trips enjoyable. We know that if someone's choosing to take their car for 1 mile or a trip that's less than 1 mile, there's a number of reasons that might play into that. Maybe they live on a very steep hill, maybe they don't have public transit or a bicycle available to them. But for those folks and in those places where that 1 mile trip really could have been achieved by biking or walking or public transit, and the thing that will help make those trips change from a car to biking or walking or transit is better sidewalks or better bike lanes or traffic calming, then that's what we're here to do. In places where it would be feasible for someone to take a short trip by biking or walking through some street or roadway improvements, that's what we're hoping to achieve tonight. Next slide. And finally, Move Forward PGH. That's a brand that I'm going to talk about in a later slide, and that's what this project tonight, the East-West Squirrel Hill Connector, falls within. But really, we're operating on a mission that was set in 2016 in the city of Pittsburgh by the City Council. For those who haven't heard of the Pittsburgh Complete Streets policy, the thing that I'd like to point out is that it is supporting and promoting a transportation system. So it's not about individual projects, it's about how those projects and improvements all connect to each other so that we have a city that is accessible, regardless of what mode of transportation you want and what part of the city that you are in. And again, the Complete Streets policy was established in 2016. So we are just building on the work that was set even before our department was in existence. Next slide. So this is a screenshot of our Bike Plus master plan. These lines that you see on the map are the proposed improved connections for bike infrastructure citywide. We had not had in the city of Pittsburgh a bike plan since 1999. And in June of 2020, we published this document after many rounds of open houses where we invited members of the public to give feedback and many, many community meetings over a number of years. And so the project that we're talking about tonight is one of the projects that was identified in our Bike Plus master plan. Next slide. So we've already seen in the chat tonight some folks who have identified themselves as people who ride bikes, and that's great. But we know that not everybody here tonight and not everybody in the city of Pittsburgh rides bikes today or maybe would ever ride bikes. We know that based on research in a lot of different cities that over a third of the population is just probably not going to ride a bike for whatever reason. They may not be able to use it, they may just not want to use it. And what we want to convey tonight is that even though this is a project that was identified in our Bike Plus master plan, the benefits from making our roadways safer for people on bikes and improving crossings with better crosswalks, which we're going to talk about tonight, and hopefully slowing down traffic. Those go beyond the people who are riding the bikes. That makes it easier and safer for people who are walking to use the street and to cross the street. And it makes it less confusing for people when they're driving their cars. So we want to make sure that as we're talking about our project tonight, that even though it is about increasing and improving bike connections, we know that benefits and changes will also improve everybody else, regardless of what mode that they're using. The biggest percentage of the population that is out there, we believe are interested but concerned. And what that means is that there are people who would ride a bike if they felt safe and if they knew where a bike could take them. And so that's really the part of the population that we're hoping we can get on bikes and maybe try that as a mode of transportation for at least some of their trips for all those benefits I pointed out earlier, which is in decreased congestion, improved air quality, improved public health, and really improved accessibility for our residents. And so this often includes folks who maybe only ride for recreational purposes, maybe younger individuals or older adults. They might feel more vulnerable or at risk using our streets. And so when we're talking about the different options for what type of bike facility that we could build as part of this project, we're really trying to design for folks who maybe aren't biking every day or haven't biked in 20 years. The folks who grew up in the city of Pittsburgh and said, when I was a kid, I used to bike around on the streets of Oakland, but I wouldn't do it today. Those are the folks that we want to get right back on that bike by making our streets safer like they once were. Next slide. So I've said Move Forward PGH. Our website is moveforwardpgh.org. What is Move Forward PGH? Well, as you can see here, it's a brand, it's a program. It is a City of Pittsburgh initiative where we are working with our partners Healthy Ride and Bike Pittsburgh to implement some of those lines that you saw on our Bike Plus master plan and to bring to life the mission of the Complete Streets policy that was set in 2016. We're hoping through this program to educate not only people on bikes, but all the members of the public about better and safer ways to move about our streets. It includes design. We're talking about changes to a roadway and ultimately encouragement. We hope by these educational efforts and by making safer spaces that are easier to navigate, that it'll encourage folks to try modes of transportation that they maybe haven't tried before. Next slide. And how are we talking to people? I mentioned that nearly 100 people had registered for our meeting tonight, and that is fabulous. That's what we're hoping for. We have used our website, moveforwardpgh.org, different surveys. We're actually posting flyers. Maybe some of you saw posters in your corridor to learn about tonight's meeting. We have a newsletter and different mailers. And so with our 2021 campaign approach, we're trying to engage communities and members of the public using our city staff and all of these different means, as well as leveraging not only members of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, but also folks in our mayor's office, our Office of Community Affairs, and our neighborhood planners. Next slide. And project development process. So as you can see, there are many steps that take an idea and a line on a map, from a line on a map to a design, and ultimately to a project. Right now, we are in the planning phase. And so we are at the beginning of this process. We developed our Bike Plus master plan with a lot of community outreach, with open houses, with community meetings, with online tools. And we're taking that to the next step. We're saying, you know what, we know that there's a gap connecting east and west in this community. Let's talk about where the best place is and what the right type of facility is to fill that gap. So tonight we're defining our objectives, which is filling gaps, and we're creating the development and evaluation of alternatives. And so when I pass it off to my director, she will go over some of those ideas. Tonight is a listening session. Tonight is a dialogue. Tonight is an opportunity for us to talk about some of the needs that we've heard from the community, including pickup drop-off needs at the Beth Shalom Temple, making sure that the farmers market remains accessible, making sure that any sort of Giant Eagle parking lot transportation needs are addressed. We were able to speak with a small number of community members in advance of this meeting, and those are some of the ideas that we've already heard. And so tonight we want to talk to even more of you and find out what your concerns are. And with that, I will pass it on to my director, Karina Ricks. You might be muted, Karina.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to make that little thing pop up on my screen, and I'm clearly not very good at it. All right. So thank you, Kim. So, that's really, we wanted to start with that important context of, why are we doing that? What is the origin story, if you will, of trying to get better, safer, all ages and abilities, complete networks into the city of Pittsburgh. So we have identified, let me see if I can make this go. So we have identified this area of the city, and that's the focus of these meetings that we're having now, as being, one of the places that we want to look at. So this is a great neighborhood. I don't need to tell you how wonderful Squirrel Hill North and Squirrel Hill South are. The bookended between two fabulous, world-class parks. We have an amazing and attractive, not one, but two main streets that serve this community. We have a number of anchoring institutions, JCC, Hillel, Beth Shalom, and on and on. The number of institutions that we have in the neighborhood. We have some bike facilities that have been created in previous years, but they're not connected. They stop and start. They pick up and drop off. This is, not only does it not create a complete network for people who choose to use a bicycle from time to time, but it also is somewhat confusing for motorists and other users of the street network as they're trying to predict what's happening. So the challenge that we're working on, with these meetings, and that we've asked you to participate with us on, is how do we create that complete connection, at least in sort of this east-west direction now, because north-south we do have Beechwood Boulevard, which is a great north-south connection, and we'll be working on some other connections as we continue to evolve the network. But how do we create this complete connection through this wonderful neighborhood that's here? So there's a few different ways that we can think about doing it. Beacon Street, we've started a little bit. So we have the short segment currently between the park and Wightman. That is the initial kind of foundation of a complete bicycle network. So we could continue that connection all the way through and make that connection to the Beechwood bicycle facility that we have. Of course, we have Sharrows already on Forbes, and Forbes does make that connection as well, from east to west. Darlington and Bartlett make a nice kind of, one-way pairs, as they also traverse all the way across the neighborhood and connect between those. Hobart Street gets us partway there, and is another nice, low volume street. It only gets us as far as Shady, but Hobart is also another street that is possible. So, each of them have certain challenges and opportunities associated with them. Forbes, I think we all know it's a higher volume street. It's a critical transit connection. It is a business district. And of course, there's a lot of sensitivities and priorities associated with really supporting and enabling that business district. And it has a fairly narrow right of way for all the demands that are on that street, needing to balance those. Darlington Bartlett are relatively low volume, low speed streets right now, very pleasant streets. They are one way, so that's a one-way pair. But those are nice streets. They do also have a fairly narrow right of way. So we would be talking about, how do you squeeze something else in to what already exists there, and how do you manage those corridors? Beacon Street, as we mentioned, moderate traffic. So there's still, traffic volumes that need to be accommodated there. It is also a transit corridor. There's transit service on Bartlett. It is significantly wider right of way than some of the others in this local network to do. But there's also some major traffic generators, right? The various institutions, the Giant Eagle, some of the other things that really create some sort of hot spots along the corridor. And then Hobart Street, which sort of falls in a mid-range as far as traffic volumes go, a little bit more akin in right of way to Forbes than to Darlington and Bartlett. But it does have that a fairly sharp turn in the middle, and as we mentioned, it's discontinuous. So those are the kind of the options that we have to work with. Again, each of them with their pluses and minuses. We have kind of started the conversation on as Beacon Street being the one, because it does, the bike lanes have already begun on that street, and so that's sort of was the national gravitation. We will have a discussion and a dialogue about if that's the place where, given these other alternatives that might exist. And feel free to kind of, make your suggestions and options known in the chat if you want to. There's also, I think that Ricardo mentioned, if you're not a chatter in the box, you can raise your hand, and Ricardo will poke me to make sure that I stop and let you speak there if you want to raise your hand and let it know you want to speak to it. But there are a number of different streets that we can look at. So just beginning the conversation with Beacon Street, because as Kim mentioned, we have had a number of conversations with different residents and stakeholders there. So we have already gathered a bit more information about that street than we have about those other alternative corridors, but we'll talk about those alternative corridors as well. So one of the things that we really want to focus on is that what we're doing here again is trying to bring investments for a complete network to this part of the community. So while we do, talk a lot about making those bicycle connections, it really is the complete network that we're looking for. And so, I'd like to we will pause here, and again, feel free to use the chat box if you want. But what we'd like to talk about is, this is an opportunity. There's resources, there's attention that now is coming to this corridor. How do we seize that opportunity of this kind of focused attention that's coming to this corridor or the other parallel corridors in this network and really make it a great street? How do we address some of the other sort of nagging concerns that you've had on this street from time to time? So this just summarizes some of the things that we've heard in these conversations, that the intersection of Bartlett and Beacon is one that folks have expressed some concern about, whether they're walking or they're biking or driving through there, that's an intersection some folks have raised as being an area of concern, that this could be an opportunity to make that better. We've heard about both the Munhall and Imperial intersection, as well as the Murdoch intersection, as being places where we really need to improve the pedestrian crossings. Those are both currently unmarked crosswalks. And so we can take this moment to improve those pedestrian crossings and really highlight that greater walkability and pedestrian connection across the corridor. We've heard that the intersection of Murray and Beacon, perhaps there's not enough pedestrian crossing time there. And so looking at how do we facilitate, again, pedestrian enhancements at that corner. We've heard that going in and out of the Giant Eagle, that curb cut, you know, the sight lines, there's a little bit of topography there as you get there, that those sight lines are not great. And there's a little bit of stress merging in and out, particularly out from that driveway. We've recently made some changes, and I think that you probably know, at the Shady and Beacon intersection to improve pedestrian safety there. There may be more that we can do there. You know, it is an opportunity, of course, to make it a much more comfortable street for those interested but concerned people on bicycles that Kim mentioned. So, you know, how do we calm the street for all users, just make it a lower stress street, whether you're walking your dog or jogging, you know, on the bike lane or someplace else, you know, riding on a bicycle, more predictable for motorists, just lower stress overall. It's an opportunity for that. You know, how do we really, we've seen in the pandemic, you know, a lot of people kind of coming out and wanting to do more active, the Beechwood bike lanes, for example, I see probably as many people jogging and walking in those lanes, trying to socially distance, as I see people bicycling in those lanes. And so how can we, you know, it's again an opportunity to kind of create that kind of neighborhood. What Kim was referencing of how do we reflect those values, the things that we talk about, the neighborliness, the communityness, how do we redesign that street so it really kind of conveys that. Lower traffic speeds and less traffic noise. The motor vehicles on Beacon are a little bit noisy. So, you know, it's an opportunity to do that. Safer operations at the school zone. So around Hillel, making those school flashing signs more effective, dealing with that better. Street beautification is something that we've heard that this is an opportunity to do that. It is a lot of pavement, any which way you slice it on Beacon. So how can we, you know, take this opportunity, excuse me, to make the street still more beautiful? Yeah, your homes and yards are gorgeous. The street, there might be some opportunities there. Better curbside management. We've heard about parking and the farmers market and really making sure, and as we said, the Giant Eagle area, how do we have better curbside management? And how do we get better compliance from all users? We've heard about concerns with we've heard about compliance with people on bicycles, from people using bicycles. We've heard about compliance from motorists. From time to time, we hear about compliance from pedestrians. So how can we use this as an opportunity to do those? Is there anything I missed? I just want to stop for a second. You know, if you can create, and if it's really, you know, as we're bringing this attention, as we're bringing this vision here, what are the things that you would like to see from a better Beacon Street? And again, we can capture that for the other parallel corridors. It's just we've had conversations leading to this with various stakeholders of Beacon. Ricardo or Anna, I don't know, I can't see if people are raising their hands, or Anna, if there's things you want to maybe, you know, call out from the chat box.
Yeah.
I've seen a bunch of things happening.
Yes, thanks. We have a couple of raised hands. After these two raised hands, maybe we can do maybe one or two questions from the chat. So I'm just gonna call Daniel. Daniel, please unmute yourself.
Good evening, everybody. I attended the walk around a couple of weeks ago. I live right next door to Hillel Academy, in the middle of the block between Murray of Beacon Street. between Murray and Wightman. I've lived here for close to 50 years. And it's a very complex block. It's nice to see that bicycling is sort of driving the awareness of the need to do things here, but it seems like it's still not a comprehensive plan. So I have some concerns about that. Sorry about my dog. And I sent to Ricardo after the tour a list of my observations and concerns, and I just wondered if you got those. Did you receive those, Ricardo?
Yes, I believe I received those.
Thank you, because I have tried to make those concerns known to the city for quite some time. I guess my biggest concern is that the parking lanes and the bike lanes, making the safety of the positioning of them as conducive as possible to realistic safety concerns for everybody, rather than primarily for the bikers. So if you could just speak to that.
Sure, I will. Just to kind of couch what's going to happen here. So I wanted to take this slide to really talk about what, if we're, again, building a better, not to steal President Biden's kind of motto, but if we're building a better Beacon Street, what are those things that you would like to see enhanced about it from the current condition? What can we do? And the next slide, we're going to go through some of those things that we do not want to see sacrificed in this quest to make a better street. So some of that, what you just mentioned, we'll be capturing in that slide and addressing, if that's okay, to just kind of have this one sort of focused on what would you like? Are there things certainly that you've seen that would make Beacon Street better?
Hi, can I answer that question, or do I need to raise my hand?
We were trying to use that raise hand system. So if you want to raise your hand, and I'll call your name in a little bit. I'm just
Okay,
gonna go. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just gonna go ahead and call Aaron.
Hi, Aaron Robertson. I live right at the end of Beacon Street by the park. I was mostly interested in having the bike path or sidewalk extended into the park. It's very dangerous. I ride my bike a lot, down to the trails. But it's very difficult to get from Beacon Street into the park without entering into traffic. And then some of the intersections there are difficult to navigate. So it creates a lot of time either getting off your bike or waiting for cars to pass. So that extension of the bike lane and sidewalk kind of down into the park towards the Boulevard of the Allies intersection would be really critical, I think.
Thank you for that.
Ricardo, can I pause for a minute and see? I'm trying. It's like an exercise in ADHD to check all of the chats and present too. So maybe Anna, can you? I know you've been watching the chat. Can you maybe shout out? We will record all of these and review all of them, but just while we're here, can you maybe hit sort of like 2 or 3 or 4 points that you've seen pop up in the chat, maybe, and
Sure,
then we can go to the
Yeah, a lot of the questions are basically around like the connections that these streets make and like what are they connecting to for like what reasons, and also around in the planning process, like how are you gathering data to make the decisions that you're going to make. And then generally the comments that are being made about things are about speed and scary traffic behavior, as well as just like pedestrians using the street a lot, and then like use by people who bike.
So if I can frame it as things that we could do better in building a better beacon, we can slow traffic down. We can obviously, make it more comfortable for the bicyclists. And what was the pedestrians? We want to provide more pedestrian space, or is it a good thing or a bad thing that the pedestrians are in the street? Sorry,
They were just generally saying that there's a lot of people that they see already using it who are pedestrians. So just making sure that they're rolled into the equation because they are already a high user for the space.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Ricardo, I'll let you go back to the hand raising, and then we'll get to the next slide where we can capture some of those, the worries and concerns.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, we'll do the next 3 raise hands and then we can move
I
ahead.
can actually answer Aaron's question quickly too, because I don't believe it was on this map. And we should have caught that earlier. That's not my bad. But we are planning on taking the path. There's been discussions to take the path that exists into Shenley Park at the end of Beacon and make it accessible to bikes. We've heard a lot about bikes already using it, despite the fact that it is not very easy to bike on currently. So we have been discussing that as well as part of that, the Beacon Street to Shenley Park entrance.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to call the next raise hand. Harriet, please unmute yourself.
Hi, there's 4 of us in this room, and we are homeowners at Beacon Place. One question I have for you is the speed of traffic going to be modified with this new bike path? And also, because there's a lot of seniors that live within our community in this general area, accommodation so that we both understand with the bike path how we respect each other. When bikers are on the path, and when some of our seniors want to get out of our building.
Great, thank you. And we'll record that. As I said, when we get to the next slide, we'll record some of those concerns. So the concern that I'm hearing is the conflict between pedestrians and bicyclists and not wanting to aggravate.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Mhm.
Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry I came into this meeting rather late. I was wondering if you're talking about going from, and I'm sorry if I'm asking something that's already been asked. If you're going from Wightman Street, turning onto Beacon, going past Hillel School and coming up Beacon, are you going to do away with parking? What are you going to do?
No.
And how are you going to do bike paths when there's no room for them? And you have all these children and you have all these schools and you have all this activity and all this congestion. I have spoken with quite a few of my neighbors and we are all very concerned about that. We do not want those bike paths.
We're going to get into some alternatives, so you haven't missed anything yet. So you'll get into seeing some of those things. Right now, what we were really just trying to identify is what are some things that can be improved upon, and then the next slide, we're going to talk about some of the concerns or the risks that we've captured from speaking with some people. So if there's anything, the folks that have their hands raised, if you want to speak to, kind of again, your sort of hopes and dreams for the better Beacon Street, if we can capture those here. And if you want to wait, until we get to the slide about concerns, we can do that too. That's the very next slide. I know everyone's eager to get to that one. So just want to finish kind of, are there other, things that can be improved to be made better, desires that you have, beautification, street trees, lighting, other kinds of things that, again, in the spirit of building a better Beacon Street. We've heard traffic calming, we've heard obviously intersection safety, pedestrian crossings, as things that could be better about Beacon Street. Anything else? And then we can slip to the next one. Ricardo, I'll go back to your hand management.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just a reminder to the people that just joined, we're using the raise hand option for you to ask questions. I'm gonna call Josh, please unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for setting this up. This is great. If I was looking to improve Beacon Street, obviously, if you're going to make space for a bike lane, you got to keep the parking. The question is obviously discussing protected bike lanes versus bike lanes next to the street. Probably will lose a lane of traffic. And if we decide to lose a lane of traffic, which probably might be that's the best way to reduce speeding, aside from speed traps and speed monitoring by the police. My concern is if we take a lane of traffic out is the left turn backup, like, because there is no left turn signal at the major intersections, and during rush hour, if it wasn't 2 lanes for a significant length of car lengths, then the left turn will just back up Beacon. You know, it's already backed up halfway down the block now during rush hour. And also, one of the questions in the chat was, do you see bicyclists? How frequently is it used? Well, you know, I live on Beacon between Murray and Shady. And given that it's a pretty steep hill, I don't see that many bicyclists. I mean, me as a family, we bike, and we always hate biking home because we're at the top of the hill near Shady. So we usually bike up either, you know, Bartlett, because it's a better hill. So I've said my part, and I'm also worried about if you do choose to do parking protected bike lanes like they have in New York, I have some serious safety concerns with that, with pulling out of driveways, etc. All right, so I've said my part.
Thank you, Josh.
Are there other hands raised, Ricardo, or should I go to the next slide?
Yes, we have Donald, and then we have Aileen. So Donald, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, everyone. There were 2 things that, one of which I put into the chat, and it's not really directed towards the Beacon corridor, but just in general. I'm wondering if the bus lanes, you know, the dedicated busways, if they could possibly be incorporated for partial use of bikes, because they get a whole lot less traffic than some of the street corridor. So that was just a comment. The question I had was, and I provided feedback to some folks that our neighbors talk with. The corridor from the beginning of Beacon, as you exit the park heading west towards Wightman, that's posted 25 miles an hour. And my comments internally were, starting at the park, people could drive 60 to 70 miles an hour down that corridor. And I know sometimes they've done that. It's possible. And tearing up Beacon Street, if we at least put speed bumps or something to slow the traffic down, I think that would be helpful. And I like the previous person's discussion about having redo the light signals, so you do get a left turn lane on Beacon heading east to go onto Wightman, because yes, indeed, the backup is bad there. I live at 5552. I park in the street, so you know, I've been here for over 30, almost 40 years, and I've seen a lot of coming and going. And with fast traffic, actually, our cars have been smashed up down in the street with cars going out of control. Doesn't happen often, but messed up my car. It was almost totaled. You know, so yeah, those are a couple of comments I wanted to make. For what it's worth.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Donald.
Why don't we take one more comment, Ricardo, and then I'll go to the next slide just to keep us going in that direction.
Yeah, that sounds great. We have Aileen. Please unmute yourself. Aileen, please unmute yourself if you can.
Yeah, I get it. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I had the mute on. Yeah, I didn't even know how to raise hands before I was doing it. But yeah, I think definitely every intersection, like whether it's Murray and Beacon or Wightman and Beacon, if you're going to take any lanes away, that's the problem I've really noticed in Oakland when you put the bike paths. You don't put turning lights in. So anything that goes from 2 lanes down to 1, what you've done is you've increased congestion terribly for drivers, for what are actually very few bicyclists. And that it's not that I'm against people bike riding, but I honestly feel that on a main street like Beacon, where you have cars parked, and those people oftentimes are people working in the area, they really need that parking. And you have all these school children, all different ages. You have preschools there, you have regular school age children. There's so much going on that it can't take any more congestion. And I mean, I live here and I have to pull out all the time and from my driveway, and I'm always very careful, but I mean, it's still very dangerous. I do not want speed bumps, and I'll tell you why, because I noticed that the speed bumps on Beacon, and I did speak with Mr. Gilman's assistant about it. The department that did them made those speed bumps so high that you can't even go 5 miles an hour. I mean, it really rips out the bottom of cars. So if you were going to put speed bumps in, somebody has to get a little bit reasonable about the height of them. So that's what I have to say as far as what you need to do.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for that.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide, which we've already kind of covered a lot of this. So the constraints and the concerns. So these are things that we've heard people say. Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, starting sort of at the west going east. That pathway, there's green infrastructure there. Really want to make sure that there's no compromise to the functionality of that green infrastructure, that pathway. I think we can add to that the comment that, I'm sorry, I can't recall everyone's names, but Harriet maybe made, saying, one of the concerns is we don't want conflicts between pedestrians and bicycles if we're putting them in the same kind of shared space. So that's a concern that needs to be addressed. We've heard about the access for the Hillel Academy, the maintenance of the kind of functions and activity and pickup and all of the things that happen in association with the farmers market, the Giant Eagle access, the Beth Shalom activities that are happening there. Those are really kind of dense activity centers along that curbside. Some of the constraints is that we do need to provide, again, there's different stakeholders who are part of this. So one of the constraints we need to provide is that we do need to provide somewhere in this neighborhood a safe, all ages and abilities bicycle connection. As we said, we recognize that there's not, you may not see scores of bicyclists out today, in part because it is a little scary. And so there's a lot of pent up demand that we're trying to accommodate so that we can provide a less scary accommodation for people who want to bicycle. It needs to be, the constraints we need to address is that whatever we choose, it needs to connect. It needs to actually get from here to there in a safe and logical way. We've heard the constraints we need to address is that there's a number of driveways along Beacon Street, or again, these concerns probably project to any of the other corridors that we might look at. There's a number of driveways, and so we need to have safe access in and out of those driveways. There needs to be clear sight lines as you're getting in and out of that. We don't want to trade one, safety hazard for another, so that needs to be addressed. There's a lot of parking demand, particularly as you kind of get into that section between Wightman and Murray, and well, frankly, elsewhere in the corridor as well. And so one of the constraints is we don't want to see a tremendous loss of parking, but that needs to be preserved. Loading activities need to be preserved. That needs to not be compromised. Beacon is a transit corridor. That's not going to change. So we need to make sure that there is access to those bus stops. Not only do we need to preserve that access, but frankly, we need to improve it. There's some operational, issues about buses being able to get to the curb and do those kinds of things. So that is a constraint that needs to be dealt with. Having safe and logical turns across the bike lanes, both for when people on bikes are turning as well as when motorists are turning over there. That's something that we've heard, that people are concerned about, that conflict that happens. None of you we know want to injure, any other traveler in here. So how do we make sure that that's safe and logical? We've heard concerns about street sweeping and snow clearance. Whatever is chosen here needs to make sure that quality maintenance of the street is maintained. And we've heard a lot about street pride and wanting to make sure that whatever is done is visually appealing, that it's not going to be something that looks, like a negative in the street. So these are some of the constraints that we've gathered. Tanya, a neighbor on the 5500 block, sent me a few more earlier today, concerns about loading of passengers. So that's another constraint of just making sure that, you know, that getting in and out of motor vehicles, the activities, the pickup drop off for school children, you know, making sure that that is safe is another one of those. So we can pause for a second. And I'm wanting to be a little bit cognizant of time because it's already, we're creeping up on 7. Let me suggest that because we've already captured a lot of these, I was going to pause here to gather more of these. I think many of you have articulated them in the earlier things. If you wouldn't mind putting those in the chat, just so we can keep kind of pressing forward in time. And we'll keep building this list of some of those things again that need to be considered and accommodated. And again, there's a whole range. I want to emphasize that there's a lot of tools that we have, which is what we're going to get into. You know, we really can, we can do, maybe we can't do it all, but we can do most if we design it in a really good and sensitive way. So needing to articulate what are those things that we're going to manage for. I've got too many things going on. The unique segments. We talked a little bit about this. Beacon Street is not consistent across its length. There is the segment in the park, which lacks sidewalks. It has just a path. It's much, much narrower, you know, more turning, has a different context in that segment than the 2 segments that we have really from Shady to the park, where you have a much more generous cross section. In one section we have existing bike lanes, the other we don't. But those are, it's straight and wide, and then you have the kind of last segment, which is that Shady to Beechwood, which again narrows a bit and has that sharp turn. So we'll need to be cognizant of the different characteristics that exist as you go along this corridor. And again, we're talking a lot about Beacon. The same, the varying character can be said of the other segments that we looked at before. Darlington and Bartlett are 2-way streets, you know, for a short segment of it, and 1-way streets for the balance of it. So there's lots of different things. Quickly, the segment from the park to Wightman has about north of 7,000 vehicles a day. These were numbers that were taken prior to the pandemic. So that's substantial. That's nothing to sniff at. Not overwhelming, but it's a significant volume, about 60 feet. It has curbside parking. There's bus routes, stops, and layovers in that segment. The traffic volumes decrease, you know, pretty significantly in this segment from Wightman to Shady, where it drops down to 5,600. Still, you know, still a fair amount of traffic. The cartway is a bit narrower there. So dropping down to 46 feet instead of 60 feet between the curbs there. It's 3 travel lanes or turn lane, parking and bus routes in that segment. Some of the concepts that could be possible. And so we're just kind of laying out the range of opportunities that are there and what these tools are. You've heard about parking protected bike lanes. That is one approach that could be made. So 1-way parking protected. So basically you would have the same thing mirrored on the other side. The way that this is arranged is the bicycle travel is adjacent to the curb. There's a buffer strip that is between where the bicyclists are and where the cars are. So there's some space there. So the bicyclists stay away from the cars. It allows, you know, getting in and out of doors. So that there's space to move there. Cars are parked, and then there's a travel lane, and then the opposite on the other side. The advantages of this kind of tool is that vulnerable road users are protected. So there's a lot of buffering for the sidewalk, for the people who are on bicycles, for passenger loading. All of that is in a very protected space. It preserves parking, loading, and access. So you would have, you know, more or less the same number of parking spaces under this scenario as you have now. It's pretty logical street operations, very linear and straight. It prevents dooring. So, you know, having a bicyclist run into you when you open the door, because there's that buffer zone between where the bicyclists are and where the door is happening. It aids in traffic calming because it visually narrows the street. And when you narrow you know, have that. That's why people travel slower as you get, you know, toward the Squirrel Hill Tunnel. You know, they get the big backup because everybody's slowing down because they get really nervous in that tighter space. So it slows people down. And it can shorten the pedestrian crossing distance, right? Because pedestrians will generally be crossing from where the parking lane is to where the other parking lane is. So they have a lot less pavement to cross. The challenges, there's a lot of curb cuts, as we mentioned. And so, you know, those breaks in the curb cut are points of conflict for both people using the driveways as well as the people on bicyclists. The motorists exiting the driveways encounter two conflict zones, right? First, they have the travel lane of the bike lane, then they have to merge into the travel lane of the auto. Passengers who are leaving those cars need to cross, you know, an active bike lane, as we've said. We're not talking about a high volume bike lane, but nonetheless, there's a possibility of a bicyclist coming there. It requires floating bus boarding islands for the transit to be there. The transit riders would actually load from where that buffered space is. And so we would need to build a platform essentially for the bus riders to load there. Street cleaning and snow removal, it's a different dimension. So it becomes a little bit challenging to do that. I'm going a little bit fast. I'm sorry. I'll be here as long as you want to be here, but I want to be respectful of your time that we can. Oh, and it does have the opportunity for some landscaping. That's been done in other communities too. So it has that advantage. Another possible approach is a two-way parking protected bike lane. And so, you know, rather than having, you know, east bicycle travel and west bicycle travel being split on opposite sides of the street, they're both consolidated to one side, either the north side of the street or the south side of the street. So all of that bike activity is happening on one side. You know, the advantage, again, vulnerable road users are protected. It preserves most of the parking and loading. It's easy to clean and plow with conventional equipment because it's wide enough then that they can just use that. Some of the challenges, there's potential confusion at intersections because now you've got bikes going in both directions, kind of on one side. It's a little bit less intuitive and logical for motorists. There's a wide separation from the parked vehicles to the sidewalk on one side of the street. The other side of the street's fine, it's right up against the curb, but the other side of the street does have this wide separation. It's an asymmetrical street section, which means we would need to adjust signals and other kinds of things. There would be some shifting that would need to happen to do that. The curb cuts on the one side of the street would have multiple conflict points now, right? Both directions of bicycle travel and then also the lane. And they may experience illegal parking in the bike lane because the cycle track is essentially as wide as the parking lane. So you can see it, for example, there, the Penn Avenue cycle track, there's curb cuts there. You can see how all of that works. But we do consistently get motorists parking and loading in that bike lane, which is a problem. Excuse me. Another possible approach is the one-way buffered bike lane. So the section for this one is the parking would be right up against the curb as it is now. The bicyclist would be adjacent to the parked car, and the buffer would be outside of where the bicyclist is, and then you would have the adjacent travel lane next to them. So this is Wightman, so I'm sure you've all seen that. That's the thing on Wightman. So it's somewhat lower stress for bike users. There's no physical protection, so there's really nothing that would stop a motorist who really wanted to speed from, you know, kind of just eating up that extra buffered space. So it's not as comfortable for, you know, your average 12-year-old who wants to, you know, bike up to the Shenley Oval, but it's a little bit more than what's out there right now. It has a modest traffic calming effect. Again, it's just paint, so paint does some things. It doesn't have maybe the same effect that really physically narrowing the street would have. It's more legible to motorists, so it just seems to make more sense to the motorists, even though it's a little bit less comfortable for the people on bikes. It can be more comfortable for the vehicles in loading their cars, right? Because they, you know, now the vehicles are protected by the people on bicycles rather than the people on bicycles being protected by the physical cars. and you can maintain it with conventional equipment. You know, the challenges are that parking, because the parking vehicle will constantly cross across this space. There's a lot of conflict for the people on bicycles. It precludes any kind of protection, real protection, for people on bicycles, so that people can get back and forth to that curb. There is that risk of dooring. So when the driver's side door is open, that's where we end up with bicyclists and vehicles and motorists being injured, because the bicyclists are in the door zone in this arrangement. There is the risk of double parking, which, you know, completely erodes then any kind of safety, and actually is a much more dangerous situation for people on bicycles. And there is a potential parking reduction, because, as we said, the buses really don't have enough space to pull all the way over to the curb right now on Beacon as it is. And so that's why the buses will actually load from the travel lane. So we would need to adjust, perhaps. We have not done this level of analysis to know that, but that may be something that would need to be adjusted, is to make sure that the buses then can get all the way across to the curb. Another option to consider, which would be a center median cycle track. So this takes the bikes and puts them right down the middle of the street. So any of you who've been to Washington, D.C., this is the arrangement that exists in that stretch between the U.S. Capitol and the White House. It's on the inauguration route. And so that puts bidirectional bicycle travel in the middle. That's then protected by either painted or landscaped, or combination of both, buffers on either side of that. It can be very comfortable as a bicycling experience if it is properly protected. So that's where we would need to make sure that motorists are not going to just use it as, you know, a passing lane or something flying by everybody else, but it needs to be properly protected. To do that, it can, you know, be a median, you know, planted median effect if it's properly protected with landscape planters. It provides a pedestrian crossing refuge. So if you're crossing across the street, you can cross just that one lane of traffic, have like a relatively safe space to kind of wait before you cross that next lane of traffic on the other side. Really doesn't have any effect on parking or bus loading, because those are way over at the curb as they are now. It's very effective at traffic calming because it's this median, and so you're splitting the traffic between it. You can maintain it with conventional equipment because it's wide enough. The challenge is, again, effectively protecting the cycle track. So that's something that, for this to be worthwhile, that would need to happen. Intersections get a little tricky. We'd have to, you know, we'll have to work through that, especially, you know, what happens when we do have those turn pockets, what happens when other things happen. But again, this has been done in other places. We'll have to just design it and figure that out. Mid-block crossing conflict. So when you're coming to pull into your driveway or you're exiting your driveway, making sure that there's gaps so that you can get across this, and making sure that those are managed in a way that everybody, you know, remains safe. But that's another option that's available to us. And then not on Beacon, but if we were to, you know, utilize either Bartlett or Darlington, we would then be needing to consider a neighbor way, which is a very traffic calmed, low speed, low volume corridor. So that's where we would introduce things like perhaps speed humps or, you know, other kinds of things. But because of the one-way segments of them, you know, we would then consider a contraflow lane, which means that bicyclists would be, you know, quote unquote, wrong way riding on these streets, at least in one direction. So they would be going with traffic in one direction, contraflow in the other direction. Again, the advantages are, you know, the streets that these go on get the advantage of some pretty good traffic calming. They get the advantage of vehicle volume reductions. So, you know, you're lowering the volume of vehicles that would be on these streets. You're, you know, introducing logic to, you know, what would otherwise be wrong way riding. They're self-enforcing because it's in the opposite direction. They're really quite low stress streets for everyone concerned, for pedestrians, for people on bicycles, and for motorists who are traveling, where it becomes a little bit more less stress, where it becomes higher stress for motorists is for motorists who are coming in and out of curb cuts who would not necessarily expect to see a person on a bicycle coming from the opposite direction. So that can be illogical. It can be challenging when you get to the intersections. Again, it's workable. They generally just follow the pedestrian signals. Where there are signals, however, the other challenge in either neighborway or contraflow lanes for Bartlett or Darlington is that there are unsignalized crossings across some of those heavier streets. So that's something that would need to be resolved of dealing with those crossings. You know, these are things that are all on the table that we'd want to kind of get your feedback. I've seen things flicking. I haven't been able to read them that are coming in the chat of sort of your reactions and thoughts to these alternatives, what works, what doesn't work, you know, just sort of initial reactions. These are very conceptual at this point, and for the most part, we're talking about what would be the typical section. Again, there would still be turn pockets, there would still be other kinds of things, but what would be the typical section in that trunk section of Bartlett going from the park to Shady. We would need to, some of these solutions would not obviously be feasible in those last connecting segments. We would still need to work out some alternatives for those. That's where we are. I want to do a time check because we're over time. I don't want to speak for the whole team. I'm happy to keep going until 7:30 because we prattled on too long here. I want to be respectful of your time. If there's a temperature check, if we should just press through with the rest of this information so you can carry on with your lives, or if we want to pause and get a sampling of reactions here. Team, Ricardo?
Yeah, I'm good to stay.
I can stay for a little bit. And I neglected, this is Kim, I neglected to mention during my intro that we will be dropping, if we haven't already, a link to a survey in the chat. So please look out for the survey. And for any questions that we might not get to tonight that you have dropped in the chat, we will follow up in writing to everybody who registered to tonight's meeting. We will send out responses to frequently asked questions, as well as putting them on our website, moveforwardpgh.org.
So I'm not seeing anyone kind of punching into the chat box that like, no, wrap it up, we want to go home right now. So continue. Thank you, Julie. So why don't we pause for a second and just take you know, a few reactions, thoughts. And I don't know if you want to start from what's been kind of, I've been seeing on my side, kind of flying through the chat, maybe some initial, summarizing some initial themes that you're seeing popping up there, and then we can go to the raised hands.
Sure. So a lot of questions have been coming in about like curb access and like how carpool drop off or various vehicles would be able to access the curb with a parking protected bike lane, and also like cost benefit analysis of using Beacon over the other ones. But generally it seems to be pretty split between having Beacon versus like turning another street into a neighbor way or just all the other options. And that's a very general summary.
That is a general summary. So the one I can answer is how does it work? So you would treat the parking lane, so pickup drop off would occur in the alignment of the parking lane as it does now. So there would be, as we said, with the parking protected bike lanes, there is a short gap between where the kind of passenger side of the car is and where the curb is. But you would just walk across that to get to the sidewalk then. Operationally, that's how those work. Again, these are, we would not expect these to be a continuous stream of, you know, a line of bicyclists interrupting that access. There would just be very episodic people on bikes, but generally, and they are signed. So I'll say, for an example, I know probably not one that you've seen. I came from Washington, D.C. here in front of the Veterans Administration in Washington, D.C. So I think it's Vermont Avenue. There is a parking protected bike lane there. Obviously, there's a lot of persons with disabilities, wheelchair users, others that are using that pickup drop off, and they're needing to traverse across that bike lane. And so in that case, the bike lane is, so we could imagine it at Hillel Academy, we could imagine it at Beth Shalom. That bike lane is signed with clear direction that bicyclists must yield to pedestrians. And then there's clear markings and even raised platform that indicates the priority of pedestrians going across that bike lane in those zones where you have a lot of that pickup drop off happening. So there's ways to treat that. Ricardo, do you want to go to, and we'll read all of these comments. I can't multitask quite that well of the comments coming in and paying attention to the commenters. So do we want to go to the raised hands?
Yeah, totally. We have two raised hands. We have Aileen. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, the more that you talk, I mean, first you say that there will not be any change to parking, then you say the buses have problems already. I really look at this very differently. It's not that I think that bike riding is wrong or anything, but I see a city that doesn't have funding to even salt the roads and take care of them, to even fix potholes correctly. Port Authority has dropped so much bus service for so many people that this is dealing with a very small part of the population. And at this point of time in this city, I just honestly feel that if you're going to do something, that you need to put turning lights in, you need to really improve the roads, and to really help with congestion of traffic, that what needs to be done is that we need to implement shuttle bus service for all the people in this city, because this is spending a tremendous amount of money for a very small part of the population. And to me, it just doesn't make sense. Beyond the safety issue, it just doesn't make sense to be going ahead with all the painting and the signs and the poles and all the money this is going to cost. That I think people need to be more concerned with the majority population of this city and helping them. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Aileen, and I really appreciate that. And what we have found, and we've done polling here locally in Pittsburgh, and what that polling has found is very consistent with those numbers that we showed for the no way, no how, interested but concerned. And I know you joined a little bit late, so we'll post this presentation and you can see that. But what we find actually is that the majority of the population would be bicycle users, at least occasionally, at least for recreation, at least for fitness. This is actually data that we have gathered that roughly 69% of the population are people who would at least occasionally would if they felt safe and accommodated. So,
excuse me, I do have to say this. We have a city that is surrounded by beautiful parks, and that just like nobody plays tennis in the middle of the streets, we don't need people for recreation riding their bikes in the middle of the streets. People who ride bikes should be riding bikes for transportation to get where they're going. And, if they want recreation, they need to go elsewhere. There could be beautiful bike paths all through all the parks in this city, and people could have all of the recreation they want. I mean, those are two very different issues in my estimation. I know you have to go to other people.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I appreciate all your comments. I just wanted to kind of share that data point. And obviously, what we're trying to do is kind of strike that happy balance, with safety being the main driving factor. But I appreciate your comments. Ricardo, you want to go to?
Yeah. Yes, we have Richard. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I've shared these comments before in a couple of forums with the team, but parking is very important, needs to be maintained for access to the activity centers, for the residents, for the business district, et cetera. And it looks like you are maintaining the parking from what I've seen, and that's good. That's very important. That's key. Second of two items is I want to express or reiterate that the non-protected bike lane, I think, is superior in a situation where you have lots of loading and unloading at curbside of people, of goods, et cetera. Because if the parking is up against the curb, then people getting in and out of that passenger side of the car do so at the sidewalk. So there's no conflict at all for that. And with the parking protected bike lane, you have passenger loading and unloading on both directions does have vehicular conflicts, whether they're bikes and or cars. So I feel that that's inferior in a situation such as we have, where there's a lot of loading and unloading. Another advantage, I think, of a bike lane is if it's designed to be on the street side of the parked cars, is that car traffic will stay further away from the parked cars, and people getting in and out of those cars is more of a physical separation because the bike lane is right there. So I think it's the non-protected version, I think, is superior in that regard as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Appreciate that too. Ricardo?
Yeah, we have Donald. Donald, please unmute yourself.
Hey guys, my final comments. I'm really appreciative of feedbacks that Richard, Eileen, other folks made. This is the most balanced meeting I've heard to date. And I think it incorporates a lot of people's concerns about a whole lot of stuff that I and my, 20 townhouse neighbors at 5552 Beacon have been ruminating about for years. And we were subject to the unilateral, oh, these are the bike lanes, probably about a decade ago. And that went over like a lead brick. But it balanced. I'm really happy that we're getting feedback and input to this process now. As far as Eileen's comments about speed bumps, drive through the new development between Forward and Browns Hill Road. The speed bumps are gradual. They're like the ones in the South Park area around the path, the bike path. They're gradual. And again, I want to reinforce, these are municipal streets. It's not the expressway. It's not the Autobahn. I know it's a heavy traffic corridor. My other comment is, when you guys measure traffic, if it's not time resolved, you're missing data. I mean, I'm a research scientist for many years, and you got to make sure it's time resolved, because during rush hour, yes, there's backups. The lights have to be changed depending on time of day to clear the traffic. So you got big gaps in big slugs of traffic. You got to really look at that if you want to make a sensible decision. And then it comes down to cost versus who's going to benefit, all right? And how are you not going to get people upset and accommodate them? Maybe we should have pullovers for buses on Beacon, possibly to eliminate some parking, but you know, it's a trade-off like they have on the Forbes corridor going down the hill to CMU. They restricted that, they put bike lanes, they have bus pullovers. You know, we've done all kinds of stuff here, and I really like the fact that you looked at the center median, because that was a suggestion I made. And I'm glad to see it got into the conversation. All I'm saying is you guys are doing an excellent job. Really. You did this better than I could have. And let's think, ruminate. We got to like step back and really think about this. And if you guys want more input from me, I'd like to get together one-on-one by email, whatever. Carry on. I'm glad my neighbors are thinking like I am. And all the input is excellent. Thank you all, guys. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, appreciate that. Yeah, and I really do. I will echo that I really, I thank all of you for the really thoughtful, dialogue and input that's happening here. Really welcome that. Ricardo, so
Yeah, I think I know
there are
we're
more
getting
hands?
close. Yeah,
Yeah,
I know we're getting
okay.
close to 7:30, but maybe we can do Mary.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. And I'd like to thank everyone here for a generally very civil and constructive conversation. I think we've put some things on the table that we can go away and think about and come back to. I'd like to make three very brief general points, not about particular instances, but about the bicycle network in general. First, there have been a number of requests for data on how many bicyclists are actually using the streets. The problem we have is that the streets are perceived by very many bicyclists as not particularly safe. And so making the streets safer will bring out more bicyclists and change the numbers. And we need to remember that as we do the analysis. Second point is that even if you are not using a bicycle, even if you don't want to use a bicycle, you can't use a bicycle, everyone who is on a bicycle is reducing your congestion. Everyone who is on a bicycle instead of driving a car. They're not making the roads more congested. They're not competing with you for a parking space. So every time you see a bicyclist, instead of saying, oh my God, there's a bicyclist in my way, say, oh, there's a car not in my way. And the third point is that it's not necessary for every improvement to work for everybody in order for it to be useful. We've heard a number of responses that say, yeah, I see if you do that, but I know a case where that doesn't work. Well, there are probably a lot of cases where it does work. I see things that say that doesn't work for me because that's not where I go. Well, maybe there are people for whom it will work and for whom that is where they want to go. So we should not let perfection be the enemy of making progress. If we can put things in place that benefit a reasonable number of people, then we're making progress overall and it will wind up benefiting all of us. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you, Mary. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I'm grateful for you for, and I know we're cutting some people off. I apologize for that, but I'm really glad that we have this level of interest. So if you still had your hand raised, if you can put the comment in the chat, please do. If you cannot, you can send it to me. You can send it to any of us. We do have a consolidated common email and way to receive information. My email is karina.ricks@pgh. I'll type it into the chat. pghpa.pittsburghpa.gov. Sorry. So I do want to get to kind of the next steps while we're here. You can see from these, I mean, we've sort of, I walked through all of the alternatives. We did sort of eliminate the two-way cycle track as being an option. I didn't see anything in the chats or discussions that anyone was really heroically arguing in favor of that one. So I think we're good on that. We will look at likely the Bartlett as an alternative with a neighborway contraflow and some of the other alternatives that are here. As far as next steps, Ricardo, I want to turn it to you, and then we'll wrap up again. Feel free to type it in and to the chat, and we'll follow up with everyone. We'll take you up on your additional dialogues in groups or separately as we go along.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to remind everybody. Well, first of all, thank you for being with us all this time. We appreciate and respect your time. Just reminding you really quick that this meeting is going to be recorded. And it's going to be put in our website along with the presentation. So you'll be able to see all the different slides, all the comments in the chat, and all the questions that were recorded will be also put in a FAQ. Really quickly, remind you that we'll have a second meeting. We're also having another meeting for Move Forward for the Shadyside connector. I know some of you are also wondering about that. So please join us for that. You can sign up at our website and please join us for our next meeting on the 29th for Beacon Street. And then again, we'll have another update for Shadyside on May 5th. Please follow this link. And I'm sure maybe Anna has shared some of these links already. And yeah, thank you so much. Use Engage to also add any comments or suggestions. And again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate having you here and listening to your feedback. That's really important for us.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Jacobo. Nice to see you.
Thank you. So these are always very odd endings to virtual meetings, but one day we hope to see you all. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope everybody has a great night. And thank you so much, Jean, for being the interpreter for the night. We really appreciate you and what you do. All right, everybody stay safe.